This is Ralph Sass, and this is Accounting 212, and this is the quiz for Chapter 2 and 3. Chapter 2 and 3, in my opinion, really go together. It creates a lot of material, but they really do go together. So let's take a couple of minutes and go over the quiz. Once again, this will only be the numbers. It will only be the questions with numbers in them. Okay. Once again, as I mentioned before, I always go to the end and find out what I'm looking for. And the question here asks for what are the predetermined overhead rates. Okay, so I'm looking for a rate. So let's go ahead and look for machinery. I've got machining here and I've got assembly. I've got direct materials, direct labor, machine hours, and manufacturing overhead. Keep in mind, the only thing that we are going to create the rate for is overhead. So the numbers that become really important are those bottom two, a manufacturing overhead. And then the question is what are we going to use as the base? And it says the predetermined overhead rate is based on machine hours in the machining department. So in the machining department, I'm going to use machine hours. So I'm going to have 25,000 divided by 5,000, and I get $5 an hour. So right away I know that I'm looking at $5 an hour for machining. So right now I know it's either one of those two. So now I need to look at assembly, and it's direct labor cost for the assembly department. So proceeding on, the assembly department, that's the overhead that I'm trying to allocate, 30 grand. I do it based upon direct labor costs of 15 grand. Okay, and that gives me 2.0. Okay, which, and usually when we do it based upon costs like this is a cost, this is a cost. So this here is going to be a percentage, so it's 2.00, which when we move the decimal point over is 200%. So the correct answer is $5 and 200%. On to the next question with numbers once again. Once again, I'm going to skip towards the end here and see what I'm looking for. The predetermined overhead rate per direct labor hour. So I'm looking for an overhead rate based upon labor hours. Okay, and so overhead is applied based on direct labor hours. So I've got to look for my overhead. Question then becomes what goes in as overhead. Well, the 70,000 for the production supervisor, that's not direct materials. Okay, sales commissions are selling general administrative, they're not included. Direct labor, we can place that on the products directly, so we don't have that. So we've got the 70 grand for the production supervisor. The rent on the factory equipment, we can't put that on any particular item, so we have to add the 32 grand for that. So we have to add that 32 grand. Direct materials, we don't need to apply that, that's good. Advertising expense, that's selling general and administrative, we don't have to allocate that. Indirect materials, we do need to allocate indirect materials of 10 grand. So I've got to add 10 more thousand. So I've got 70,000 plus 32, that's 102, plus another 10 is 112,000. So I've got 112,000 divided by the direct labor hours, because that's what it said that we're going to do. So I divide it by 16,000 hours, and I get $7. And sure enough, there's my $7. On to the next question. Once again, I always go to the end and find out what I'm looking for first. Predetermined overhead rate as a percentage of direct labor costs. Okay, so it's a percentage of direct labor costs. So let's see what I have for my question here. The work in process account had a balance of $2,400 in it. Okay, which relates to one job that was in the process. The related job had direct materials of 400. So notice what I have here. I have direct materials of 400. I have direct labor of 1,000. Now I'm looking for my manufacturing overhead, my MOH. I don't know what that is, but I do know that the total in the work in process inventory is $2,400. So I know that's 2,400. So the question is what is X to get me to 2,400? And it's $1,000. Well, it's a percentage of the direct labor costs. So 1,000 is what percent of 1,000 of direct labor cost? It happens to be 100%. If I put 1,000 over 1,000, what am I going to get? I'm going to get 1.0, which is 100%. So it is 100% of direct labor. If this number was bigger than 1,000, it would have been over 100%, and if it was less than 1,000, it would be some number under 100%. Continuing on to the next question, once again, only the questions with math. If the predetermined overhead rate is $40 per direct labor hour, how many direct labor hours were worked during the year? Okay, so let's see what we've got here. At the beginning of the current year, the company estimated that its manufacturing overhead would total $220,000 for the year. During the year, the company incurred $200,000 in actual. The manufacturing overhead account showed that overhead was underapplied by $8,000. So what we're trying to do is find out how many hours they worked. The easiest way that I can think of doing this is if I take a look at my manufacturing overhead account. I'm going to set it up as a T account. I put the actual amount over here. See if I can spell. Put the applied amount over here. Okay. Now, the actual, they told me during the year the company incurred $200,000 in actual manufacturing costs. So I know that's $200,000. I know that that is $200,000. Now it says that overhead was underapplied by $8,000. So I didn't apply enough. So if it's underapplied by $8,000, that means I only applied $192,000. Why? $200,000 minus 8 is $192,000. If I had overapplied it, this number over here would have been bigger. Okay. So now the question is how many hours were worked during the year? Well, I know we applied 192,000 hours. Or pardon me, $192,000. Okay, if we divide that by 40, because we know that each hour was 40 hours, okay, that's going to give us that we worked 4,800 hours. Okay, that's how much we applied. We applied 192,000 at $40 an hour, so they must have worked 4,800 hours. The next question. I'm looking for a cost of goods sold per tie. So that means I'm going to have to divide it by how many ties we'd made. Okay, we know they made 5,000 ties. Okay, now we're just looking for cost of goods sold, so we are going to exclude selling, general, and administrative. We don't care about those costs. So let's see what we have here. We have direct materials was 54,800. 54,800 was my direct materials. My direct labor was 19,200. In addition, selling and shipping costs to 2,800 were incurred. Well, you know what? I don't care about that. That's not part of my cost of goods sold. Manufacturing overhead was applied at the rate of $25 per machine hour, and it required 320 machine hours. So my manufacturing overhead is going to be 320 hours, okay, at $25 an hour. And if my math is correct, that's going to be 8,000. So my total manufacturing costs are going to be 82,000. When I add all those items up, I produced 5,000 ties. And so since I produced 5,000 ties, that means each tie cost me $16.40. On to the next question. Next question, they use a predetermined overhead rate. We're trying to figure out if overhead's going to be underapplied or overapplied. So let's see what we have here. At the beginning of the year, the company estimated costs at 200 grand and the direct labor hours would be 20 grand. For the year, actual was 215 and they worked 21,000 hours. Once again, I'm going to set this up as a T account. I love my T accounts. So I'm going to put my manufacturing overhead. I'm going to put actual over here. I'm going to put applied over here. They told us that the actual was 215. Okay. They didn't tell us the rate, but we know that at the beginning of the year, they said they were going to spend $200,000 and use 20,000 hours of direct labor hours. Okay, so that meant that they were going to apply the overhead at a rate of $10 per hour. Now they worked 21,000 hours, so if I multiply it by 21,000 hours, I get 210 grand. So they applied 210, their actual amount was 215, so they didn't apply enough, so it is underapplied by 5 grand. It's underapplied by 5 grand. Finally, the last question. I am looking once again for cost of goods sold. Looking for cost of goods sold. And to figure out cost of goods sold, I need to add my direct materials, my direct labor, and my manufacturing overhead. So I'm going to add my direct materials. Okay. I'm going to add my direct labor. I'm going to add then, okay, my manufacturing overhead, and I'm going to add the amount that was applied, because that's what's going to be in my cost of goods sold. So I'm going to take 360 plus 428 plus 452, and that will give me 1,240,000. Quick note. My indirect materials that were used and my manufacturing overhead costs, they're going to show up. They're going to be in my manufacturing overhead, but they're both going to show up over here under actual. And the amount that's going to show up in my cost of goods sold is how much that I actually applied to the jobs. So that's the amount, and that's the reason why I put that manufacturing overhead applied. That concludes the going over the quiz for chapters 2 and 3. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. Thank you.